general, it's very important to check everything that you believe.
Some of the newer practitioners,
so much misinformation out there.
It's healthy to question your ideologies.
take people's unverified personal gnosis.
All these different bad habits like
Reasonings with ourselves and going over rationality.
thinking everyone's against you, thinking everyone else is wrong.
Escapism,
Attacking others because they don't agree with you.
where they don't want to deal with like any negativity or any criticism,
The right hand and the left hand path.
And it feels like a personal attack against you.
any sort of darkness or badness in their
Where
life.
the dichotomy begins.
It's important to open yourself.
Is it really valuable or meaningful?
My name is AIDEN.
GEORGINA.
Chandler.
Welcome to Occultism with a Side of Salt.
Hello, my name is AIDEN.
My name's Georgina,
And my name is Chandler.
and you are listening to Occultism with a Side of Salt.
Today we're going to be talking about a problem that plagues our community in many areas. That would be plastic craft. Plastic craft is a term that is basically defined as having a hyperfixation on tools, aesthetics, and all the material aspects of witchcraft and magic, instead of actually focusing on the spiritual aspects and the deeper, more esoteric understandings of it.
I think as creators online, it's especially true on the internet. As in the past few years, if you haven't noticed, pretty much ever since American Horror Story came out, actually, there's been an influx of interest in esoteric spirituality in general, and there have been more people coming in every year. This increase of popularity in the media, we have this influx of people, and these people don't really know where to look, and since most of them are younger, of course they're going to go to YouTube and social media, since people have become so attached to these things and these communities, and what they see when they go on social media, like we're on YouTube and whatnot, but if you look around YouTube, and the most popular videos on the platform, a lot of them are these very aesthetic younger creators, mostly women in their 20s, and they're very beautiful, and they have these amazing setups, and they have these grandiose altars with countless tools, and you clearly can tell they've invested a lot of money into this. And because people see this online, they want to emulate that. They see these people as their idols, because no one just wants to open Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy. Like, come on, if you're a new practitioner, like, you want to, like, read some dense book from far, far back? No, you're going to want to go on YouTube and watch a quick little cute video with a girl who's like, "Hi, welcome to my channel," and take in content that way. And so through seeing this appearance on social media and on Instagram, where you see these amazing setups, it becomes about things and less about the philosophy. Because, like, aesthetics do not equal bad, but there's no way to truly give a thorough exploration of a topic in 10 minutes. So people get it really twisted as to what this is really about, because in the end, we all know, and anyone who's been here long enough knows, that it's not about the things you have, but what you're doing and the way your practice is evolving. But as a beginner, I mean, it's easy to see all these tools and these lists of altar supplies and a lot of beginner books and go, "Oh, this is what it is. I need to spend a ton of money." And think that all this is an aesthetic thing that you drop a lot of money on.
I do feel like I see a lot of hyperfixation on aesthetics and tools specifically from beginner practitioners. I do agree that a lot of the idols that have risen in the community, if you want to call them idols or figureheads, or they're more so influencers than anything really, are people who typically have a lot, and it's kind of this glorious thing to a lot of newcomers, because they're like, "Oh, I want a pentacle, a cauldron, a circle of salt, 800 kinds of incense, every single tool that I can get my hands on." Even when I was starting off, I started off in like rocky beginnings, and you know, a lot of us go to WikiHow to learn new things back in my day, and WikiHow was a source that I saw, and I was like, "Well, how do I set up an altar?" And they were like, "Well, you need this, and this." And I feel like a lot of people will read that information and accept it as fact without kind of questioning it or questioning the authenticity behind that, and go out and just spend money or spend someone else's money, if you are younger, on tools that you won't necessarily even use or need. I'm guilty of having tools that I was aesthetically drawn to, and I wanted to have them because they were aesthetically pleasing. Did they add to my practice? Absolutely not. Do people consider their practice first and foremost whenever getting these kinds of things? It's kind of iffy to say whether or not, because it kind of is something I see a lot of people with not a lot of knowledge do, and it's kind of information they've been fed and accept, and they take it and run with it. A lot of times I see the main two offenders that I see when it comes to tools is I see a lot of people invest a lot of money in either prepared plants that are marketed to be smoke cleansed, and they are labeled as smudge sticks, and crystals. I see a lot of people go for those two specifically when starting out the craft. They want a herb for everything, and they want a crystal for everything, but they don't really think about the long-term benefits or what you would really be using that for whenever you are practicing, or how often you would be interacting with that item, and if it is a worthy investment.
I think that there's this weird notion that you need to have certain tools to be able to practice. Like, there's definitely this thing I see where people will, like, I can't practice until I get X tool. I can't practice until I get Y tool, you know? And I think that a lot of people have this weird idea that without these tools, they're not a witch, they're not a magician, they're not an occultist. And I think that's just really flawed to think about. And like you said about all the herbs and crystals and stuff like that, you can do magic without those. You can do all sorts of things without herbs and crystals. You can use stuff with just your own personal power, maybe just like a piece of paper to help you out with like a sigil or petition. That's not to say that herbs and crystals aren't useful, it's just that they're not necessary. And I think that people are often told early on that they need herbs and that they need crystals, which the whole crystal thing is this whole newer movement that traditional witchcraft didn't really use crystals as much in their practice, or even at all. There was scrying crystals, but it wasn't like you use rose quartz for self-love or something like that. And I think that overall, there's just this really strange notion that you need all sorts of things to practice. And it's really kind of gatekeeping people from their own practice. Like, they're stopping themselves from practicing because they need something, or they feel like they need something.
And I find it especially interesting that I think the practitioners that I majority see guilty of this are folk practitioners. Historically, folk practice has been something done by people who didn't have a lot of agency. It was the one way these people found power. They were typically people of color, women, impoverished people without access to materials. And so they had their spirituality as their weapon and their way to feel empowered and to gain strength. And so when you see modern folk practitioners fetishizing objects and going on these lavish shopping sprees to be a folk practitioner, it's kind of against what the original notion was. Because the reason why you see, like in hoodoo, like dirts, or in Appalachian folk, like little pieces of pennies or things around your house, like that's because that's what these people had. And they were taking advantage of what they had. So when you go out and you spend $15 on a box of graveyard dirt, there's something deeply ironic about that. That's something that was considered an ingredient because of its simplicity and its ease of access has become a commercialized product that you're spending money to get. However, I want to point out that this conversation, we typically talk about witchcraft and folk practice, but ceremonialists are just as guilty when it comes to this, especially when it comes to book purchases. Books are a great investment, 100%. And this is something I am 10,000 times guilty with. Did I need an early print version of the Equinox? No. Did I need a Chumbly book? No. But a lot of ceremonial practitioners get into object fetishisms of books, rather than getting the book that is a printing of it that's more affordable, or by buying a book that you read one at a time. I see ceremonialists buying like 10 books at the same time, or buying a new book every week, or buying a first edition Azoatia print of Chumbly's stuff. Like, at that point, there's no way you're reading through that at that speed. There's no way you're like getting it because of the material. It's just pure collector's value and object fetishism. And I think that's the same discussion as plastic witchcraft. And I know that's a whole different can of worms, but I think that needs to be brought up because I think ceremonialists go, ha ha ha, look at them with their witch kits when they're buying thousands of dollars of esoteric books a month. I think it's the same thing.
I agree. What I see a lot for folk practitioners versus ceremonial, and if you want to use terminology like such as low and high, it does describe a class system going on there. And the fact that a lot of folk practitioners have been convinced that they don't use their resources and they go out and buy their resources, or even for high magic, you don't necessarily, like, you study in ceremonial magic, you study a good bit, and it is encouraged for you to keep on studying, like you said, you buying book after book after book, and investing your time in this. But with every book comes its own set, and I've seen these immaculate setups that I can only imagine cost tens of thousands of dollars altogether. Like, if you've ever been on Etsy for any kind of summoning circle tapestry or like any circle mat to do workings on, they typically range over $100, and that is a big investment for your spirituality. It's giving a large part of yourself, I feel like, and kind of just subscribing to this ongoing theme without applying some sort of self-innovation to it. As someone who practices low, or not, I kind of don't like the terms low and high, but as someone who practices folk magic and does come from the lower class and doesn't have access to things a lot, I do take from my environment. I am a forager. I am someone who goes out and learns my own land, and I have kind of a homey feel with my land because of it. I feel very comfortable where I'm at. And I know a lot of folk practitioners, such as myself, whenever they move to a new area, the first thing they'll do is learn about the area, not about the things that are available to them in a marketplace or the things that are down the street, but the area itself, what kind of shrubbery, greenery, berries, flowers, stuff like that you can apply to your practices, things that you can use in order to build your craft or kind of satiate this need for tools. I myself, I have built a couple of my own tools. Some of the stuff that I have is stuff that I have made by my own hand, stuff that I have carved, stuff that I have molded with like clay, stuff that I just have done myself, and I feel like that gives it a better purpose for me rather than just going out and buying something that looks aesthetically pleasing. I work with my land because I feel like that's what I'm supposed to do, and because I don't have the privilege of having a lot that's accessible near me, and I try to work with my land as much as possible and not contribute to businesses in order to feel like I'm growing my spiritual self. I don't think that it's a good idea whenever we talk about a form of spirituality to have a very material sense of going about it.
When it comes to buying materials, a lot of the time you're going to be overcharged, especially with crystals. If you want to buy crystals, first of all, I do want to disclaim that there's a lot of ethical issues with the mining of crystals, and there's a lot of... I personally don't buy crystals because I really disagree with a lot of the ethical stuff going on, but I mean, that's a really long conversation. I'll link resources in the bottom of the description box. You see under our Meet the Host, I always have a resources list where I link articles that relate to what we're talking about and kind of cite my sources. But if you want to buy crystals, buy them from a jewelry supplier. It's significantly cheaper, because as much as I love going to occult shops, there's a couple in New York that I think I've spent a terrifying amount of money at. certain shop owners like know my name. It's kind of concerning. But like a lot of these things are overpriced. Like the pricing you get on these tools is sometimes ridiculous. Like I was on Goop's website. Goop is Gwyneth Paltrow's shop, and they were charging like $90 for a singing bowl. $90. And like also with herbs, go to the grocery store. For candles, go to a Botanica rather than a witchy shop. Because Botanicas, let me tell you, best place to shop. They will save your life. And so it's like, you need to pay attention to the pricing of what you're getting, because a lot of the time, it's really charged high, and if someone in a shop thinks you're a new practitioner, they're going to screw you. Because they know that you haven't been around the block, and they know you don't fully know the prices of things. So just be careful with where you're buying and what you're buying, and if you're gonna buy something, make sure you're gonna use it. Like, my most expensive esoteric purchases are things that I've used a lot or read a lot of times. Don't just spend $40 on a crystal or $90 on a singing bowl without even knowing what you do with it. And going, oh, this is like cleansing, this is like witchy, I saw this on an Instagram post. Like, if you're going to be investing that much money, because if you think about it, when you spend money on something, calculate how many hours you've spent at your job to pay for that. That's a budget saving trick that I do. Like, how many hours of work is this actually costing me? It'll give you a little bit of an existential crisis, but it's an interesting way to think about things. And be careful with what you're buying and that you're getting a good deal.
On the topic of tools and buying them, I think that kind of like what Chandler does, making your own tools is a lot better, and also substituting tools. You don't need a $150 athame from Australia forged in perfect stainless steel. You can use a pocket knife. You can use a butter knife, and it'll work just as well. Most of the stuff that I use is either tools I've made or tools that I've improvised to work as other ones. And I think that works a lot better because you have a more personal attachment with it too. Personal attachment, I believe, is something that's extremely important for your tools. Especially for ceremonial tools, in my experience, it's a big importance to have a connection with them. Instead of trying to use a tool that it just doesn't feel right. It's a really large, clunky tool. Like, this is mostly like for athames, I'm thinking. Trying to save money, you should make your own tools. You can make a black mirror very easily out of a picture frame. You can use a pocket knife, like I said, for an athame. You can pick up a stick, it's a wand. And you don't have to break your bank on it. And I think that that's just a lot better way to go about things.
I completely agree. I see a lot of people, like, kind of saying they can only buy things, which is very frustrating for me personally, as someone who does go out into the world and forage for ingredients. A lot of what I see people buy are things that are completely available to them. For instance, I mentioned herbs earlier. Herbs are a plant you can grow yourself. You may not have setups all of the time that allow that, but even in city apartments, if you want to invest in just a seed starter pack and a pot, and if you really need to, a grow light, I feel like having that continuous source of the supply you're using is a smarter investment than every 2 weeks or month or so you just have a complete like, oh, I need to go and buy another like stick of sage. I need to go buy this spice that I use all the time in my craft. You are able to grow things. Things do come from a place, and you may be surprised to find out that they are things that you can grow inside of your home. As far as the stick for a wand and stuff like that, I know a lot of people who live in bigger city areas, they may have difficulty finding stuff that's like from nature, but you can still use what's on hand, like the butter knife. That's something that you can find in nearly everyone's kitchen. If you don't If you can't find a stick on the ground, get chopsticks from a Chinese takeout place. If you can't find a Chinese takeout place, just use your finger. There have been practices that have been developed by only using the self. There are practices that use breathing, visualization, stuff like that. Tools are nice ways and physical reminders in order to set this up, but they are not necessary. And I feel like a lot of people find that they buy stuff either because it is, one, their only option, which is kind of like you're not thinking outside the box, and I feel like that's something that is a good practice to do, or two, is just something that's completely not possible, which, as Aiden said earlier, you can find a substitute for almost anything. Even for someone like myself who does traditionally do something along the lines of like when I'm indoors and I'm doing something I find like extremely dangerous, I do subscribe to kind of sitting in a circle of salt. But that's a lot of salt sometimes. So sometimes I just get a black sheet that I have and I'll put a white water-based paint around it. That's a completely fine substitute for me. Like, it's not about the item itself, it's about the practice, and I feel like that's where a lot of people get lost.
And I want to clarify, we're not saying buying things is bad or it's bad to buy things. We're saying that we're talking about the phenomenon of thinking you have to buy things. Splurging on an occasional tool is normal and fine, but don't buy things if you don't know what they're for or without thinking of ways to get it at a lower price otherwise. We're not saying buying things is bad, and I really want to clarify that because all three of us buy tools, okay? We do. I've talked to them. I know they have too. We're saying that you shouldn't only buy things and you shouldn't see spirituality as a dollar sign.
I would also like to mention that it is okay to buy stuff, and if you feel like you're unable to do certain things, substituting it where you can find it is perfectly fine and acceptable, and we're not bashing that at all. That's something that a lot of people do in multiple aspects of their life, not only spirituality. For instance, even like sometimes I'm guilty of not wanting to cook a fresh dinner, so I get a TV dinner. It's not something that's bad. It's something that we see is a phenomenon that a lot of people do. And one thing that I want to talk about is price points for these items. Georgia mentioned Goop earlier on, which is a like high-end thing, high-end price point company. They sell stuff for money that I personally don't have. Walmart sells a couple of the same things for money I do have. And I find it very interesting that I can go to Walmart and I can get ripped off for Palo Santo. I can go to a Botanica and get it for a decent price. Or I can buy it from some luxury brand online and have it completely embellished and it's like pure and dipped in essential oils, hopefully not. And it just has all of these good, holier than thou qualities, and it's the best one, and that's why you should that's why you should spend $50 on this smell stick. And like, it's not economically or like financially, it's something that I've been kind of bothered by because you do see a lot of options. You see witchy stuff popping up in bookstores, in novelty stores, in even sometimes having their own shops or sections in things like stores that kind of approach more of like what I would say they self-title as a bohemian lifestyle, if that's appropriate. And it kind of has this weird price point that doesn't exist. I have seen the same crystals sold at my local witchy shop that I live down the street from for $1, and at some other like brand name place for $5, and then online for $50. And it's not a size difference, it's not a weight difference, it's not an item difference. It is purely and only the price point. A lot of it does feel like they're just being artificially inflated for people who don't know better or feel like that's their only choice. I used to buy off eBay a lot, and I still buy a lot of secondhand because I don't want to support people who are going to avidly rip me off. If that's your purpose, it always feels like it's something that is your purpose. And I don't know if these companies are just getting them from like shitty sources or something. And I don't know if they know what they're doing is like pretty much a ripoff. I see a lot of the same, and the price tag is always different. It can reflect the quality of goods sometimes. I will say that admittedly. I have bought really shitty incense for $1 and regretted it. But I've also spent $3 or $2 on the pack of incense next to it, and it was better for a moment, but just way too much. And I feel like there is a kind of point where you want to say, is this a worthy investment? Is this worth my dollar? If I'm going to be investing money into my craft, is this something that I feel like is a good deal? Or do I feel like I can get it at a better price or a better quality somewhere else? Is this what I'm looking for? And the variety is something that, on one hand, I appreciate because I do like having a lot of options to shop from. But what I don't like is being told that a singing bowl that I just saw down the street in a kiosk for $15 is on Goop for $90. I don't think that it's very... I don't think it's very ethical at the end of the day. I just really don't think that people think about the consumer, which, I mean, hey, maybe I'm just being hopeful that people sell stuff with the consumer's thought in mind, but a lot of people might say, yeah, of course they don't. They're there to make a dollar off of someone who doesn't know better. And a lot of people in this community that start out this community may not know better. They may think that, oh, this singing bowl is nice and it's probably just really good quality, and it comes and it only rings at like this certain frequency gauge. So yeah, all of the description just says that it's worth it. So obviously I want that, and I'm going to invest the $90 to $100, and I'm not going to get the crappy $15 one because it's so much less worth it. I think that kind of mindset is really damaging, and when I see people talk about plastic craft or how expensive everything in witchcraft is, I feel like they go to places that are first-hand sellers, and they don't consider things like getting your athames or your mats or any stuff that you feel like you need secondhand from antique stores or thrift shops, or even buying off of marketplaces from people who are giving up their craft. I have seen many a crystal on Facebook Market and like tables of them being like, hey, you can take this all for $10. I do not want it anymore. And you know that that table full of crystals is most likely worth way more than $10. Stuff like that is things that are things that I turn to whenever I try to shop for a new tool. I try to go for either forage or secondhand first, and then if I can't get that, then I'll start shopping around at first-hand places. But ultimately, I feel like the fact that there is no set price point for these certain items that we are all told that we need to start is kind of damaging in of itself. No one is really saying, oh, this is a good price for this, or oh, this is what should be acceptable, and if it goes past this, you are getting ripped off.
Something that I have a big personal issue with, and is a newer phenomenon, is kits. So a lot of people on Etsy especially, which Etsy, I buy a lot from Etsy. Be careful with Etsy, because Etsy is based by sellers, not Etsy as a whole website. So certain sellers will 100% rip you off, and others are literally charging bottom of the barrel to be competitive. So Etsy takes a little more vetting, but a very common thing right now is kits. So when people are new, especially, like, we kind of send them to the same few books a lot of the time. And in most of these books that we send them to, I know Buckland's Complete has this. I know Scott Cunningham's Solitary has this. I know the Black Brick Golden Dawn book has this. And quite a few others have a list of materials for your setup, where they have basically a shopping list where they'll explain all the tools you need and a diagram of how to set up your place. And so a bunch of new people will read these and go, okay, I need this. And then they'll look up kit, and you'll see these kits on Etsy where they have all the tools you need in one of these setups that you see in, like, I mean, I haven't seen a full kit for the Golden Dawn Black Brick, but you can find all those supplies by the same sellers. But for, like, Scott Cunningham setup, I've seen kits that perfectly resemble it. And these kits will have, like, 10 things in it. And you'll look at the price, and it'll be, like, $250, $300. And you'll go, okay, well, that seems reasonable for the amount of stuff I'm getting. But then you look into what these materials they're selling, and half the time they're drop shipped. Like, they're literally AliExpress tools that this person has put into a kit and has sold for $300. And I'm not going to really harp on the Sephora Witch Kit that came out a couple years ago, because everyone's talked about it, but I'm more talking about, like, altar setups. But, like, kits are a bad idea, because just like subscription boxes in a lot of ways, you're going to get things that you don't want. When you buy things individually, you can hand select them and put a lot of thought into what you're getting. But when you get a kit, it's just a ton of shit thrown at you, and you're probably not going to use half of it. Like, I see these herb kits where you just get given a ton of herbs, but if you don't know, like, what the herbs are for, and if they're not for specific healing purposes or specific intents that you need, why would you buy just a pack of them? Or, like, equipment, tools, like, what if you buy an altar kit and you're not Wiccan and it comes with Wiccan stuff? Like, what then? You wouldn't know any better. And you don't know where your path's going to go, and you don't know if you're going to completely change directions. Like, what if you're Wiccan and you buy some $300 Wiccan kit, and then you later get into Thelema and need a whole different arsenal? Like, I think you should be buying things as you're using them. Like, you need a bowline. Use it when you're being asked to use a bowline, or you know that you need that in your practice, or a stang, or an athame, or a bell. Like, don't buy these things until you know you're using them, and buy them specifically for what you want and what you need. And also, a lot of tools antique shops have. But, like, don't just get a kit of a ton of shit, because that's probably not a good deal, and it's probably not even going to be stuff that you personally want. Like, I just think kits are such a way for people to prey on beginners a lot of the time, and 90% of the time, they're really not worth the deal that you're getting off them, and are just a bunch of random stuff that the person can't sell in the rest of their shops. They've thrown it in, like, a little lucky pack and are sending it to you.
I think this gets into the discussion of having the perfect aesthetic altar, or having the perfect aesthetic setup. A lot of times these days, it looks like that people are trying to have these aesthetic, Instagram perfect setups for their craft. And I think that's not true to witchcraft. That's not true to magic. I think that while yes, aesthetics are important, they aren't everything. It's like this. An aesthetic can help you get into a certain headspace, but aesthetic is not required to get into that headspace. The aesthetic may look nice, it may help you and get into certain headspaces where you are able to step out the mundane into the more metaphysical. But witchcraft is messy. Witchcraft and magic is messy. If you look into the history of folk practices, it's not a super neat, aesthetically looking thing. There aren't cute little jar spells typically. Like, if you look at traditional jar spells, those look ratchet. They're not really these cute little wax sealed jar things with all these little herbs in them. They have nasty things thrown in there because that's what they had. And I think that focusing way too much on aesthetics can lead you into just not even practicing. A lot of people will get a ton of aesthetic stuff to get the witchy aesthetic, but not actually practice with any of those tools. They won't actually use them for what they're used for, what they're meant to be used for.
Of course, aesthetics are something that are nice to have. Obviously, you want things to look nice. You want things to be set up intentionally, and you want them to be nice looking. But I do feel like when we focus on aesthetics too much, we focus more on form and less on functionality. And I feel like functionality is something that you should keep in mind whenever you do set up your altar. I am currently dismantling mine because I realized I never even used it. I didn't even use it as a working space. I used it for prayer, so I'm going to be turning it into just a spot to pray now. It's something that I realized, I treat my entire room as if it were my altar or my working space, and I just have a complete feeling throughout my room that I'm like, well, this is my sacred space, and this is something that I consecrated to do most of my things in, everything in, and whenever I leave, I do take something that's a part of my room to reconnect with my my own intended sacred space. Touching back on the subject of kits, the idea of an altar kit has always been interesting to me, because I feel like even though there are certain practices that are like, yeah, this is everything you need, I do not think that, especially with solitary practitioners who kind of form and borrow and kind of become eclectic the more time goes on. I know a lot of people identify as an eclectic practitioner, but I think that's something that is just part of natural evolution in your spirituality. I feel like it's completely normal to borrow from things and to take what you've learned and apply them elsewhere and just kind of spread out and find something that suits you. I see a lot of people sell a certain kit that I have some distaste for, and that would specifically be the smudge kits. I see a lot. I've seen them in like Spencer's, Urban Outfitters, stuff like that, and I understand that ceremony or ritual is something that is exclusive to the Native Americans here, although I'm not educated on which tribes practice it or what do that, or who perform that ritual, but I do understand its parts as being like all four of the elements combining. I was reading a little bit about it earlier, but nothing. I can send Georgia resources on using specifically white sage and how it's gotten popular to put in the description box below that one of my friends sent me earlier today, and reading up more on what that ritual or ceremony entails and why it is done and why it is unethical, or not really unethical, but honestly it feels more immoral to practice that and to put it in a kit and to sell it on every single storefront with a new age or a witchy section that you come across.
Yes, these essential things that we see as witchy or beginner, like crystals, sage, kind of crystals and sage are the big ones. Those practices aren't rooted in witchcraft. Hate to break that bubble. Crystals are from the New Age movement, and smudging, which please, if you smoke cleanse, don't call it smudging, because smudging is a specific indigenous ceremony. Like, that's not from because the majority of people who are witches are pulling from European and American practices, right? And those two things are not even from the practices these people are following. Which just, please, when you do things or are new to the practice, like, research where you're getting your information, because if you, like, smudge your house and then say, haha, I'm so witchy, like, pull from witchcraft. You're gonna be a witch. I mean, I'm an occultist, not a witch, personally, but I practice occultism. But still, like, it's a big thing to pay attention to, which I'm pro-eclecticism. Do whatever you want. Be a chaot for all I care. Like, I'm super eclectic. But, like, if you're gonna just pull from things from all directions and say it's one... Like, just be honest as to where you're getting your information from and practice things that align with what your goals are. And just... I think there's this big overlap between the New Age movement and the witchy community that this goes into. The New Age, some things that are New Age are not witchy, and there's an overlap, but they're different. I think the New Age movement has really kind of interjected itself into the occult space in the past few years when they're really kind of separate.
And there's this big thing on Instagram specifically that your aesthetic matters more than your craft, if that makes sense. Like, there's this thing that I see where people are posting aesthetic images of their altar spaces, their setups, their spells, but they aren't really posting about actual witchcraft. They're posting about an aesthetic. It's like, it doesn't really matter what kind of aesthetic. There's just all sorts of aesthetics under the witchy aesthetic that people have attached themselves to. But it's all kind of the same, where they just kind of have it there and not really doing anything with it. And this is less so on other platforms. This might just be because I'm not as active on other platforms. But I think that on Instagram specifically, there's a big push for aesthetics over practice. And I think that's just not healthy. I think that it also promotes this idea that you need everything to look nice. You need everything to be in these little jars. I see jar spells a lot on TikTok, actually. And that seems to be all that anyone does, instead of branching out into other different practices that aren't as aesthetically pleasing. Because witchcraft isn't aesthetically pleasing at the end of the day. Most of the spells that I do, they are messy, they're all over the place. I honestly think that the aesthetic should be a secondary thing to actual practice.
I see it a lot on not only Instagram, but I see it promoted in almost every social media space except for YouTube, and even YouTube has some offenders sprinkled within it. I feel like a lot of people don't really familiarize themselves with theory, or kind of go into the mindset of why, and just want something that looks nice. And looking nice is okay, but when there are tons of social media posts that just show a bunch of pastel, frilly, just lovely, like, oh, look at this amazing, I'm so spiritual, I'm so enlightened, and it's just a very clean setup, it's visually appealing, but that is not the only kind of spirituality or practice in the occult that's out there. I myself, if you know of my practice, I work with things that are dead, and like, I am not afraid of getting my hands dirty. Even things such as, let's say, a sour jar. One of the most important ingredients in a sour jar is your first morning piss. That is not something that I will be publishing anytime soon on any social media. No one wants to see a jar full of my pee. I don't even want to see it sometimes. But that is part of what the traditions hold. That is part of the spell itself. Not everything is going to be burned, engraved wood chips that you throw, or nice looking tarot cards, or a nice altar mat with a very clean setup. Let's take incense. Something as simple as incense, for instance. Incense can get messy very quickly. I am horrible at cleaning up, and because of it, I have a lot of ash from my incense. However, I use this ash to make black salt. That is not a clean process. That is something that I harvest the waste from my materials, and I make new materials with. I try to use every part of something and put it aside and just try to ultimately give everything its full lifespan. If something has a distinct magical purpose that I have set aside for it, maybe I won't try to reuse it because I don't want to mix the intentions or implications of what I did previously into a new project of mine. If I do reuse something, I typically go through the process of what we call cleansing and try to give it a fresh start for a new life. When I think about the social media aspects of witchcraft, I never see something that looks like it could come from history. It always feels sort of like it has a love and light, new age vibe to it. And that's not inherently bad, but that is not the only thing that there is in this world. Even stuff that's very pristine demonology setups with your triangle of art and your seal of Solomon on the floor and everything like that, that is a very nice and clean setup, but that is not always a nice and clean practice. Sometimes things can get messy, and I feel like because we don't document the messy parts as much as we document the pretty parts, everyone has this mindset of, oh, everything has to be aesthetically pleasing. Everything has to align with a certain look or a certain aesthetic in a way, and if it's outside of that, then it doesn't count or it's not valid. And that kind of mindset can be very toxic and limiting, and overall influence others if you are sharing this kind of content and putting down others for sharing a nasty content, stuff with bone, or stuff with dead insects, or even bodily fluids. If you're putting all of that down and only praising herbs in moon water and candle wax, you are ultimately going to be promoting only one tiny sliver of a huge world. And I feel like promoting that so much, and even too much, can kind of show everyone in the world that, oh, this is what this means. If you are not this aesthetically pleasing, very nice looking thing, then you're like a dirty, disgusting person who doesn't know what they're doing, and you're just being messy because you don't know better. It kind of paints others almost in a barbaric way to me.
Yeah, something that actually reminds me of this is if you haven't seen the movie The Love Witch, it's very aesthetically pleasing, but it's very accurate to actual practice. And there's this scene where she does a lot of very aesthetic practice the entire movie. It is very Gardnerian and thalamic feeling the whole time. Great film. But she makes a witch's bottle, right? and she uses her morning piss and her bloody tampon in it. Which, if you know the traditional recipes, that's exactly how you prepare that. You're supposed to use your tampon and your piss in it, because that's the preparation. And as someone who's made them, that's how you're supposed to do them. And people, when they watch that scene, they get extremely uncomfortable a lot of the time. And they're like, ew, why would she do that? And I'm like, no, they're following historic accuracy and doing proper research in the film. And they're like, well, I would never do that. And I'm like, well, then how are you going to make a witch's bottle, right? Like, how are you going to do it without the crucial ingredients of bodily fluids and menstrual blood? Like, that's the preparation. And to vary from it and to shame people who are doing the traditional method is to shame your own practice. It's like, if you're afraid to even accept that people do these practices using bodily fluids or gross things, then are you ashamed of your own practice? Like, especially people who work with Hecate. Like, if you know what they were doing in the PGM and in her temples, like, the priestesses were, like, bleeding on the altars. They were using literal poop. Like, it was brutal stuff. And there's a recipe in incense in the PGM where you burn baboon poop as part of her incense, because she's a goddess of rot and essentially gross things. And so if I see, like, a Hecate, like, clean little jar, like, with candle and shit, like, candle and stuff, like, that's so different from what the historic practice is. And if you're ashamed to accept that other people's practices, or ashamed to promote, like, practices that are dirty, are you really even promoting what you're talking about? And do you even really care about the real, the truly accurate historic witchy aesthetic?
My final thoughts on the topic of plastic craft as a whole is that the practices of plastic craft in of itself seem almost as if it were ironic or kind of like an oxymoron in a way. Ultimately, it seems like some sort of false ideal that money is completely necessary to perform every spiritual practice, or that you need material to perform a spiritual practice in and that in of itself, I feel like, is counterintuitive in a way. I feel like having such a hard focus on the material aspect is kind of creating a fissure in our communities that do attack the impoverished in a way. I feel like putting this hard focus on, if you aren't buying all of this stuff, or if you are only doing this thing that needs to be pristine and clean and really nice looking and follow XYZ with no substitutes. And I will say that there are some practices where no substitutes is listed, so there but most of the time the substitutes are completely normal. And honestly, if you aren't in a locality where a practice has been formed, you might be SOL, like you might be shit out of luck, and you are going to have to make substitutes. That doesn't make you lesser than, that doesn't make you invalid, but there shouldn't be a hard focus on materialism and spirituality. They are two almost opposite things, and to kind of say that they go hand in hand, I feel like is extremely counterintuitive.
Magic isn't about what you have, it's about using your own power to achieve your own goals. You use magic when you are searching for something in life. You use it for when you need something in life, and to better yourself and to empower yourself. It's not about consumerism. You should be following your true will and not what a company wants you to buy. You should be following what you want and not what other people tell you to buy. You should be following your ideals, not an aesthetics ideals.
In the end, I mean, the materials just help you get there. Like, they're just tools to access something greater. And I mean, They're tools. Traditionally, all you would need is a bell, a book, and a candle, which you can get that for like $15 at Target. In the end, it's not about the tools you have. It's about like what you're actually doing. Tools are fun, and splurge now and again. We're not saying don't spend money, and we're not trying to shame you. We're just saying that be pragmatic with your purchasing, and remember that spirituality is more than looks, and sometimes you may have to put a used tampon in a jar, and that's okay, and you're just as valid as someone who has a bunch of crystals, okay? You're just as valid. Keep on putting tampons in jars. So, spirituality is more than looks, and that's what I want you guys to remember, and have a good day. This has been Georgina.
I've been Aiden.
And I am Chandler.
And you have been listening to Occultism with the Side of Salt.